Hey guys, welcome back to the Compost Pile, your source for all things gardening and homesteading. I'm David, your host, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about rain. Such a simple thing, but brings huge impact to the garden, to the homestead, to land, to a lot of things. Without it, things can be very difficult, but sometimes because of it, things are difficult. We're going to cover a lot of points today about what rain brings to the table, and we're really going to talk about how it's a lot better than this municipal water. So let's dive in. So obviously the first thing that comes to mind when we get a good rain in the garden or around the house is the fact that maybe, hey, we don't have to water these plants. Maybe we can go without needing to water for multiple days depending on the quantity of rain. And sometimes that's true, but it doesn't always eliminate the need for water. Right now, it is mid-July. It is scorching hot. It's humid. It rained a whole bunch less than 4 days ago, and we're back out here watering almost every day right now. So what are the important parts about rain? What does it bring to the table that this kind of water does not? So some of the main benefits that we get from rain that we don't get from municipal water is number one, oxygenated water. So we get water that's falling in, that's bringing oxygen into the soil, into the root zone, which is vitally important for all of your plants to thrive. Next, it's going to contain nitrogen. So you get atmospheric nitrogen, so you're replenishing some of the nutrients back into the soil. And you're not going to get that from municipal water. Municipal water, on the other hand, tends to be highly chemically treated, so it's designed to sterilize, to make it safe to drink. So we're getting rid of some of the things that might be beneficial for the soil that could be contaminants to us. One of the biggest things that we get when it comes to rain is we get the low and slow approach of water in most instances. So a lot of times it's raining, we get a nice steady rain, it rains for a period of time, and the soil gets deeply saturated. And that's really important as a concept when we're watering the gardens, even with municipal water or any rain collection system, is ensuring that we are deep soaking and deep root watering. This helps ensure that we have deep roots, healthier plants, and a stronger garden that can produce a higher amount of produce for us. Oftentimes we get a nice, good rain, and you come out the next day and the garden is just exploded. It looks amazing. There's new growth, there's rejuvenation. Things that maybe didn't look as good a week ago kind of have a breath of new life in them. And a lot of that has to do with the quality of the water that we get from natural rainfall. Now, there are a lot of negative things that can happen from rainfall, and a lot of these things teach us a lot about how we should water our garden. First, here in Southeast Texas, it's not uncommon to get many inches of rain very, very quickly. I would say probably in the last 30 to 45 days, we've gotten up to 10 inches in an hour. We've gotten 4 to 6 inches in an hour, and that's a lot of water. The area behind me was underwater for an entire block after one of these heavy rains. When we reach this point of moisture on the ground in such a short amount of time, it's not necessarily a good thing. Yeah, everything is getting deep root watered, so that's awesome. But when we get excess water that builds up and stays, it becomes unhealthy for the plants. And that's because once water soaks in, it fills the pores of the soil. So every little tiny cavity in the soil and in our beds where our roots are growing fills up with water. That also pushes the oxygen out. And then the soil becomes anaerobic. So the soil basically can't breathe, the roots can't breathe. So long-term standing water or lots of excessive rain is not really conducive for growing small vegetable gardens. So we have to ensure that we have great drainage and that we've built a system that can handle water. And that's why here we obviously have raised beds, because this works out for us in ensuring that our delicate plants that are producing vegetables and fruits have a way to get out of the water and not be standing in 2, 3, 4 inches of water for a day at a time. So not only can it make the soil anaerobic, it can also lead to compaction. So one of the benefits we have here is we have trees, we have coverage. So trees actually dissipate the rainfall. They act as a buffer. So the rain is falling, it hits the tree leaves, it stops, it slows it down, it catches a lot of moisture, and then as it makes it to the ground at a slower velocity, it helps reduce compaction. When we have large open areas, even areas where we have grass, just maybe you have a lawn and it's wide open and we get a lot of heavy rainfall, it contributes to compaction in the soil. It also contributes to how plants react and how they can support themselves in their environment. So we just found out recently that the house we lived in before this particular one, it had an oak out front and it fell over. The whole root ball uprooted and it fell over. And this is because of excess amounts of rainfall. So whenever you get a lot of rainfall and the soil becomes compacted and it pushes the oxygen out, it actually reduces the amount of friction between the root system and the soil that you have with a plant. It becomes mushy. Think about walking over wet or damp ground and it becomes muddy. You're pressing down, you're pushing the moisture and the oxygen out. That's what happens to these trees. It's not that they were necessarily unhealthy or ill cared for. They basically lost their footing. There wasn't enough friction and the soil was too wet and they lost their support system. And the same thing can go for plants in the ground. Even in raised beds, if our soil is just really poor quality and these beds were to start holding water, some of the same things could happen. You could have taller, upright plants that might want to fall over or not be able to hold themselves upright. So next, we have to think about nutrients. So a good steady rain helps move nutrients through the soil. And that's really important. We need nutrients that are in the very top layer to work their way down into the root zone layer in the soil. It could also help us supply the moisture that's needed to help the microbes break down a lot of the organic slow release fertilizers like our MicroLife 624 that we put in these beds, or any other natural fertilizer. It needs oxygen, moisture, and the soil food web to break those nutrients down, and that moisture helps move it through the soil. Now on the other hand, if we get these torrential downpours or these massive rains all at once that I've mentioned, we can also leach nutrients out. A good way to think about this is if we're constantly watering a container grown plant, then we typically have to feed it more. We typically have to water it more because the water's moving out, it's drying up faster, and then those nutrients are being pushed downward through the soil, moving, and then they're drained out of the pot, leached somewhere else, and then we become nutrient deficient. So a lot of these excess rains can really leach, and they can cause runoff and move nutrients out of the areas that we might want them. So this is an important concept because figuring out ways that you can retain the right amount of moisture on your property, even in large areas like turf grass, or if you have in-ground beds, you want to be able to retain some of that moisture, but you want the excess to run off. But you want to keep it so that the nutrients can ideally stay and not run off to water catchment areas like the ditch behind us here that's going to drain into the municipal water drainage system. So rainfall can also teach us a good amount about disease. So this year has been a great example of showing how disease moves from the soil where it begins, soil-borne pathogen. We'll use tomato plants as an example. A lot of people are seeing early and late blight this season, and that typically starts in the soil, and then water, a lot of times rainfall, if we're actually watering properly and we get out here and we water at a soil level, we're avoiding splashing and we're mimicking kind of the low and slow method. So we're flooding the bed, trying to keep water from splashing up onto lower leaves. That's how we prevent a lot of these soil-borne diseases from happening. Now, when we get a heavy rain, we obviously can't control what Mother Nature's going to do. And these rains, they splash moisture up onto the bottom of the leaves on things like tomato plants. Those pathogens get started, and then as it rains more, or maybe if we're accidentally, overhead watering, we might be moving that pathogen all around the plant or even from plant to plant. So even though rain is such a beneficial thing, it's really beneficial in moderation and slow and steady when it comes down. But if we get these crazy downpours, which seem to be so much more prominent here in Southeast Texas than they were before, and maybe they're not, I'm no weather expert, but it tends to make disease a lot more prominent. It also teaches us that airflow is incredibly important, because when we get a lot of moisture, it's the summertime, here the humidity is 100%, and so we get warm, damp air trapped up under the leaves and the canopies of plants. It's not escaping well. It's the perfect conditions for disease to really go rampant. So having good pruning practices, pruning up, keeping lower branches of disease susceptible plants away from the soil, so that if we do get a heavy rain, hopefully we can't get that splashing up onto those leaves, and maybe we can mitigate some of that. Really heavy rains also bring up the importance of having a mulch layer. Mulch in a bed can help keep some of that soil from splashing up and getting onto those leaves and starting disease. So keep that in mind. If you're in an area that's really rain prone and you get some really heavy downpours consistently. It's also important to consider and pay attention to how much rain is actually coming down, because the rain's not only watering the plants that we want, it's watering everywhere. And it means it's watering the weeds, it's watering, plants and seeds that maybe haven't germinated yet, that we might not want, that may sprout up in other places and come up. So we have to be mindful about that and ensure that the areas that we don't want plants growing in, they have really good drainage, they're not holding excess moisture, that we're learning and observing the conditions of the soil in areas where weeds are growing, so we can look at how we can make changes to correct them. And that same thing, the rain teaches us a lot about our soil, because it either holds water or it drains through really well. And that can teach us what we might want to do to change. If our soil isn't holding water and it's draining out really fast, we might need more organic matter to help get a more sandy loam texture instead of the kind of that sandy texture which will drain really fast. On the other hand, here it's primarily clay soil, so we are constantly trying to add carbons, compost, humic acids, microbes, and just general things that can help long-term and better the soil, so that we can change that texture and that top layer where most of our plants are growing, and that it will drain better but also still hold moisture. That's another reason why in areas where it's mostly residential neighborhoods and maybe people have, that they do have turf grass for the kids to be able to have activities on, but they still have maybe backyard chickens and such. We use mechanical aeration to help alleviate some of that compaction that we get, that primarily comes from the rain coupled with the soil conditions that are natively here. Rain also plays a big part into some pests. Southeast Texas, nobody likes a mosquito. And if we're getting a lot of rain and we do not have good drainage and we have areas of standing water, whether it's in components of our homestead, from insect waters to bird baths to just low spots that hold water for long periods of time, these become stagnant water, which are really important for mosquitoes to breed in. So we can use the indications of these types of conditions to ensure that we're focusing on getting standing water away from areas so that we're not contributing to the pest problem. Rainfall also plays a big factor for insects in pollen and nectar. When it's really dry, then plants don't produce a lot of pollen and nectar, primarily nectar. And whenever we get an insane amount of rain, it actually kind of washes away some of those pollens and nectars. And so it plays a role in controlling part of that pollen and nectar flow, and it's not always in a good way. So if you're a beekeeper, maybe you got a backyard hive, maybe you have many, rainfall plays a huge role in the seasonality, especially with like the tala honey flow. Tala trees are the main source for pollen and nectar for honeybees here in Southeast Texas, and then goldenrod in the fall. So really rainy seasons have a drastic effect on those things. So, and that also can have an effect in the garden for other pollinators, butterflies, bees, solitary bees, bumblebees, the whole 9 yards. Lastly, when it comes to insects, I know most of you out there have probably dealt with a fire ant bed in a container, a raised bed, or just in your garden in general. Heavy rains, especially with really dense clay soil, the first place fire ants go is to high ground, or they get elevated. You know, they do really well at surviving really wet conditions, and they're really a resilient insect. But most of the time they move into areas that we don't want them in. I find that keeping very, very active beds that are well fed and that are very conscious of the soil food web, and I'm using things that support microbial life, I don't really find a whole lot of fire ant issues in this particular garden. Now, I have a bed at our studio space in our education center, and it hasn't been grown in this season, and so it's kind of in a sterile state, and the fire ants have been rampant in it. I'll get rid of them and then they'll come right back because there's really no life happening in that soil. The combination between the soil food web and plants and their roots, it's just not active. So keep that in mind. You know, if heavy rains, if we're not getting good drainage, then we're going to see potentially a lot more fire ant activity in areas that we might not normally see them in. Now, I know we don't talk a whole lot about turf grass on this channel, but at least where I live, turf grass is a huge part of most landscapes, most homesteads. I mean, it's a pretty big part of this particular property for me here because it's where my kids play and where we have activities and we're able to get out there and enjoy ourselves from time to time. But when you couple taking care of turf grass or large open areas, you can learn a lot from understanding rainfall by how the yard reacts to heavy rains. So if we get a really heavy rain, we have a lot of shade here. So a lot of these areas stay damp for a long period of time. And if we do a lot of even heavy walking traffic over the same area, we're going to trample those areas down to dirt because we're actually contributing to compaction. We're stepping on that damp soil and we're pressing it down, and the oxygen and the moisture is pushing out and it's compacting further. If you couple that with, you know, lawn equipment, if you're just out here cutting and you just want to get it done because, hey, it's rained every week for the past 3 weeks and you're having a tough time getting the grass cut in there, setting a heavy piece of lawn equipment out over this, sometimes Some of these machines, at least I know for us, we have a landscape company. Some of these machines weigh over 1,000 pounds, and then we put ourselves on top of it. That machine is tracking over every square inch, and it's pressing down the soil, it's compacting, so not only might we leave mud tracks and make a mess, but we're actually doing damage to the soil. We're hurting the soil food web, we're hurting the root system, and that's one of the ways when it's damp and you make a turn on a zero turn mower or even just a push mower, you make a really tight pivot on there and then it tears or pulls the grass. And that's the same way with, I mentioned the trees falling over. That friction that exists between soil and root systems is much lower because of all that moisture. So rain's just really an interesting thing. If you really want to get down to it, it's vital. It brings so much life to a space. But if you don't take the lessons from it, that can actually help teach you how to water your garden, how to mitigate common problems that we see in the homestead all the time with pests, with disease, just with general, large plant care, then it's a lot harder to be successful. That's why I wanted to take a bit and while I was out here by myself this episode and talk about something that I feel is so simple, but it really brings a lot of teachings to even the most seasoned of people, makes you stop, realize what's actually happening out here, and it gives you some insight on how maybe you can learn to prevent future problems down the road. So I hope you found something useful out of this episode. Thanks for tuning in. If you find useful information on this podcast, we encourage you to like and subscribe or share with somebody you know that might get some value out of this. We would really appreciate it. And we'll catch you next time here on the Compost Pile.